Good morning. It sounds a little bit like a party in here. I don't know if that means everybody's like excited to be here or it was just because we were running late. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And I will call the joint meeting of the Finance and Assembly Ways and Means Committee to order. Will the committee secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson. Present. Assemblywoman Backus. Present. Assemblywoman Brown-May. Assemblywoman Dickman. Assemblywoman Gorlow. Here. Assemblyman Hafen. Assemblywoman Howdigi. Assemblywoman Kasama. Here. Assemblyman Miller. Present. Assemblyman O'Neill. Assemblywoman Peters. Here. Assemblyman Watts. Assemblyman Yeager. Senator Canizaro. Here. Senator Goycochea. Here. Senator Harris. Senator Neal. Here. Senator Wen. Here. Senator Severs-Gansert. Here. Senator Titus. Here. Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Here. Chair Dondero Loop. Here.
Thank you very much, and mark those that are absent present as they arrive. And please remember to silence your cell phones. And we will have public comment at the end as we have prior to this meeting each time. So today we have several subcommittee reports to do. And so we are going to start with the Legislative Council Bureau Capital Improvement Program. And Mr. Thorley will join us to present that. And then we'll have Ms. Waller, Ms. Mangoba. I don't know who's next. We'll get there when we get those done. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members. For the record, Wayne Thorley with the LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. I will be reading into the record the subcommittee report on the Legislative Council Bureau Capital Improvement Program. The recommendations for this come from the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP, which was closed on, I believe, May 4th last week. The Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP has completed its review of the Legislative Council Bureau's requested capital improvement program and has made the following recommendations for the 2023-25 biennium. The subcommittee recommended total funding of $217.1 million to support 16 projects for facilities improvements in Carson City and building improvements for 3 buildings and the construction of 2 parking garages in Las Vegas related to the subcommittee's recommendation to approve CIP Project 23-C35 for the purchase of 18 buildings in Las Vegas, of which 3 are designated for the legislative branch. The subcommittee directed fiscal staff to bring a recommendation to the full committee for how the $217.1 million in funding could be supported between general fund appropriations and financing through the issuance of general obligation bonds. In reviewing the recommended capital projects for Carson City, it was determined by fiscal staff that the 4 projects identified for information technology services have already been accounted for in a one-time appropriation bill recommended for the legislative branch. Removing these projects, which total $2.9 million, would leave 12 projects for facilities improvements in Carson City and reduce the overall total capital projects request to $214.2 million. Based on the State Treasurer's General Obligation Debt Capacity and Affordability Report for the 2023-25 biennium, $100 million in general obligation bond affordability was identified for capital projects for the legislative branch. Accordingly, the funding split for the $214.2 million as revised would be $100 million in general obligation bonds, and then the remaining $114.2 million in general fund appropriations. There is an attachment to the back of the report. This is the CIP project request from the legislative branch. I would make one quick note under the 3rd subsection on the one-page list, under the section where it says Las Vegas office expansion, building improvement capital projects. Project number 3 there, where it says third floor only, that relates to tenant improvements on the third floor, the entire building, not just the third floor, but the entire, all 3 floors of that building would be, based on the recommendation of the subcommittee, would go to the legislative branch. And happy to answer any questions that the committee might have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Senator Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question about the parking garages, and then I'll speak to the vote when we get to that or to the motion. The parking garages, will those be solely used for legislative purposes, or will those be shared with other state employees in the vicinity? You know, I've talked to the administration folks, and it sounded like those garages are needed in that area, given the number of buildings that the state is purchasing. So checking to see if those are intended to be exclusively the LCBs, or whether they'll be shared. And then the other question I guess that would follow is why the LCB would take ownership potentially versus them just being operated by the state. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brenda Erdos for the record, Legislative Council Bureau. The 2 parking garages are going to be a little bit different. The one that is by the building where the main staff will be, and any legislators' offices who choose to be there, will have a secured area in the basement. Well, that's the first floor. And then the rest of the parking garage will be open for the public and anyone else who wants to park there, including what we anticipate is as those buildings fill up with other state employees, it would be not just legislative business, it would be those folks as well. But it is something that we needed to build to provide the security for parking for legislators and legislative staff. The other sort of square one that's on M24, which is by the building that will have the hearing rooms in it, will be entirely public parking. So it would be available for people, for the staff of that building, but also for people who are attending the legislative hearings in that building, as well as we think as those buildings around that area develop, there's not a lot of parking there, and so it would be probably filled up with the rest of the people that are around there. As to why your last question as to why we asked to own these buildings, we believe that we can very efficiently operate them and more importantly secure them in the way that you're used to for legislative employees and legislators, and we are able to be at least as efficient in the build and the cost as the state branch of government, as the executive branch of government. So.
Thank you. I just wanted clarification on that.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions from the committee? Thank you very much for joining us. And with that, I'll accept a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Canizaro. Thank you very much. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I'll be opposing this motion. We talked about this in subcommittee, and we talked about it when we did the operating expenses as well. Our initial goal was to hire about 30 people and, open up the ability to hire individuals, highly qualified individuals in the Clark County area to work for the legislature. And this has grown into a potential ask for 1 building to 3 buildings with significant capital improvements. I think it's about $100 million for the southern expansion, including tenant improvements running $500 to $700 per square foot as proposed. And when you look at the staff to maintain those buildings, given the significant expansion, there's like 88 related to just the buildings, maintaining the buildings, working in the buildings, around the buildings, versus 31 staff that would be working in fiscal and legal and research and so forth. And so I think this is a massive expansion that's very expensive. When you look at the operating expenses, we're going to go from We're going to increase the budget about 71%, and employees will grow from 302 to 469 total, 302 to 469 total for the legislature in just one biennium. And so I'm very concerned about the expansion of space, and then need to be able to maintain it and objective to fill it when I just don't think we need that much. So I will be opposing this motion. Also, I just want to talk briefly about the work that we've really never even talked about this, that's proposed for this building. And we just redid the front of this building, but there's a redo on here for about $36 million more after having just completed the project in the front of the building, so on the west side, and we still have the east side to complete. So thank you for this time to be able to comment on it once again.
Thank you very much. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will be voting for this motion. As I said during our subcommittee meeting, we had 18 buildings down south that we looked at, and there was one building that could have accommodated all of the needs of the Legislative Council Bureau in one building, which would have been the fiscally responsible thing, I believe, for us to do. However, our governor decided that building was for him and not for us. So to accommodate our needs in the space that we needed, we had to go with 3 buildings, which meant that we had to have more staff than we would have had to have in the one building. And as far as the repairs and improvements to this building, there were briefings earlier in this legislative session. As you walk in this building, you can see where the walls are crumbling on the outside. We're living in an era of politics, which is kind of sad, where we need to think of the safety of not just the legislatures, the staff that are in this building, but everyone coming into this building every day. It's improvements to the front of the building to give more space, square footage to this building, but the main thing is for safety and security. That's why the ask for the next renovations to the front of this building is to keep everyone in this building safe. So, Madam Chair, had we been able to get the one building that we all, a few of our members toured the building, we would have been able to have less staff, but that didn't happen. So we're going with Plan 2, and Plan 2 means more staff, more money. Love to just get that first building, didn't happen. So this is where we are. And Southern Nevada legislators need a space to work out of, as I said during the subcommittee meeting. The state has grown. We have constituents who we meet with in coffee shops to talk about legislation with lobbyists. We need a space, an office space to work in where our constituents can meet us and lobbyists and stakeholders. There still will be meetings in our assembly districts and our Senate districts, but it's time that we, kind of grow up and professionalize the business of the legislature. We are here for 120 days, but if we are doing the work that we are supposed to do, that we are elected to do, it's 365 days a year. Whether you're elected for in the Assembly or the Senate, your work doesn't stop just because the legislative session ends. Not everyone that sits in the legislature has their own business office that they can work out of, and I'm sure they're not inviting people to their homes, to their kitchen tables, although sometimes that does happen. It's time for us to grow up. It's time that our constituents have a space that they can go to, a safe space in Southern Nevada, and when they come into this building, that they walk through and have a safe space here. So, Madam Chair, I will be voting for this.
I appreciate your comments. Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo my Senator's comments that I do not agree with this large expansion, and I also want to put on the record that these are not one branch's buildings or another. I hear the governor's buildings and LCB buildings. These are really the people's buildings, all of them. It's taxpayer dollars that go into building these and supporting them. I'm also opposed to LCB owning the buildings versus public administration that manages so many of our other buildings. And so therefore, I will be voting no on this large expansion as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any additional comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Nays are Senator Titus, Senator Gokachia, Senator Gansert, Assemblywoman Kasama, Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblywoman Dickman and Assemblyman P.K. O'Neill. All right, did I get everybody? Thank you very much. Motion passes. We'll move on. Next is Ms. Waller. Welcome. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committees. My name is Julie Waller with the Fiscal Analysis Division, and I will be presenting two subcommittee reports this morning. The first is for the Department of Administration State Public Works Division. The Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education, CIP, has completed its review of the State Public Works Division budgets and makes the following recommendation for the 23-25 biennium. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the Joint Subcommittee. Regarding the Engineering and Planning Budget 1562, the subcommittee recommended approval of Budget Amendment A230121562 to fund 1 Program Officer 2 position and 4 Project Manager 2 positions and associated costs, with inspection fees totaling $1.3 million over the 23-25 biennium. The budget amendment was recommended for approval to ensure the division had authority for sufficient staffing levels to address the anticipated workload from implementing the 2023 Capital Improvement Program. The subcommittee recommended approval of the remainder of the engineering and planning budget as recommended by the governor. The next budget is Buildings and Ground, Budget 1349. The subcommittee concurred with the governor's recommendation to fund deferred maintenance projects totaling $1.8 million over the 23-25 biennium, inclusive of a technical adjustment to eliminate $50,000 in each fiscal year for a duplicative concrete repair project. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to fund 1 new painter position for a total cost of $153,252 over the 23-25 biennium. The subcommittee recommended approval of the remainder of the Buildings and Ground budget as recommended by the governor, including technical adjustments. Fiscal staff notes that after the approved statewide rates and technical adjustments were incorporated and this budget was balanced, the projected level of operating reserves in fiscal year 2025 was less than 20 days, which is below the optimal targeted reserve level of 60 days. In analyzing the budget further, it was noted that the recommended statewide cost allocation plan, also known as SWICAP, charges for this budget total $545,339 in fiscal year 2024 and $545,351 in fiscal year 2025. The SWICAP recovers an equitable share of central service costs such as budgeting, accounting, and auditing from federal funds and other funds. Additionally, the SWICAP includes a building depreciation cost pool to recover the costs of capital improvement projects and major building renovation costs originally funded from the State General Fund, which is charged to state agencies occupying the buildings. The majority of the SWICAP for the Buildings and Grounds budget is related to vacant space for buildings for which the Buildings and Grounds section is responsible. And as included in the budget, the SWICAP costs are passed on to other state agencies through building rent rates. As such, if the SWICAP charges for the Building and Grounds budget were to be eliminated for the 23-25 biennium, the projected level of operating reserves at the end of fiscal year 2025 would increase to approximately 61 days, which is within the range of the optimal targeted reserve level for this budget. If this option is approved, fiscal staff would work with the Governor's Finance Office and the Department of Administration during the interim on the SWICAP building depreciation cost pool for the Buildings and Grounds section to ensure the vacant space is allocated appropriately. Therefore, the decision for the committees is, do the committees wish to approve the elimination of the SWICAP charges of $545,339 in fiscal year 2024 and $545,351 in fiscal year 2025, and direct fiscal staff to work with the Governor's Finance Office and the Department of Administration during the upcoming interim on the SWICAP building depreciation cost pool for the Buildings and Grounds section to ensure the vacant space is allocated appropriately.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Move to approve?
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Gansert. Any discussion? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought she had her hand up. Did you have a question? I'm sorry. Okay, second by Senator Canizaro or Senator Gansert. Take your pick. No questions, no discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much. We'll move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Waller again for the record. The subcommittee recommends closing the following Department of Administration State Public Works Division budgets as recommended in the executive budget with minor technical adjustments by fiscal staff and a recommended letter of intent for the Marlette Lake budget to provide the Interim Finance Committee with an update on the fiscal year 2024 raw water sales revenue for the Marlette Lake water system, as well as provide a status update on the Marlette Dam Rehabilitation CIP projects 19C08 and 23C22 if approved. These budgets are Administration 1540, Facility Condition Analysis Budget 1560, and the Marlette Lake Budget 1366. The subcommittee authorized fiscal staff to make technical adjustments throughout the division's budgets as necessary.
Thank you very much. Any questions? I'll accept a motion.
Move to approve?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Canizaro. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. We'll move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Waller for the record. The second subcommittee report is for the Office of the Treasurer, Bond Interest and Redemption Account, and the 2023 Capital Improvement Program. The Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP has completed its review of the State Treasurer's Bond Interest and Redemption Budget and the 2023 Capital Improvement Program, also known as the CIP, and has made the following recommendations for the 23-25 biennium. For the Bond Interest and Redemption Account, the subcommittee recommended approval of the budget as recommended by the Governor, with technical adjustments to align Property Tax Revenue Authority with projected collections and to transfer reserve reductions of unobligated interest earnings totaling $525,463 over the 23-25 biennium to fund the operating expenditures of the statewide infrastructure bank. The subcommittee further recommended approval of authority for fiscal staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. Moving on to the 23-25 Capital Improvement Program. Inclusive of considerations to the budget amendments submitted by the Governor's Finance Office on April 3, 2023 and April 30, 2023, the subcommittee recommended total funding of $1.167 billion for the revised 2023 CIP, funded with general fund appropriations totaling $399.8 million, state obligation bond funding totaling $560.7 million, $111.3 million in state general obligation bonds with debt service to be repaid by the Highway Fund, Highway Fund appropriations totaling $11.5 million, reallocated bond proceeds of $5 million, and other funding sources totaling $78.4 million, inclusive of federal funds totaling $69.9 million, to support a total of 97 projects in the revised 2023 CIP as follows. $808.2 million in funding for 29 construction projects, $258.9 million in funding for 49 maintenance projects, $57.1 million in funding for 6 planning projects, and $42.5 million for 13 statewide projects. The following describes the notable construction projects recommended for approval by the subcommittee. The subcommittee recommended approval of CIP Project 23C02 for a 73,488 square foot full-service Department of Motor Vehicles facility with commercial driver's license services on Silverado Ranch Boulevard in Las Vegas, as recommended by the Governor, funding total project costs with $105.9 million in state general obligation bonds with debt service to be repaid by the Highway Fund. The subcommittee recommended approval of CIP Project 23C06, the remodel and addition of the Southern Nevada State Veterans Home in Boulder City, as recommended by the governor, funding total project costs of $99.8 million with $35.8 million in state general obligation bonds and $64 million in federal funds. The subcommittee recommended approval of CIP Project 23C30 for the construction of a 130,000 square foot administration building on the Kincaid building site in Carson City as recommended by the governor. Funding project costs of $158.5 million with state general obligation bonds. The subcommittee recommended approval of CIP Project 23C35, the purchase of state office buildings in Las Vegas, as recommended by the governor in budget amendments received on April 3rd, 2023, and on April 30th, 2023, funding total purchase costs of $213.9 million with state general obligation bonds for 18 buildings and a parking garage, which when combined provide a total of 835,518 gross square feet of office space. Of the 18 buildings, 15 would be intended for the future occupancy by the executive branch agencies, and 3 buildings would be for the future occupancy by the legislative branch. The 18 buildings and parking garage are recommended to be purchased in 4 separate tranches, beginning in July 2023 and ending in March 2025. With a revised recommendation to purchase existing office space, the governor proposed that CIP projects 23C05, 23C18, 23C28, and 23C29, which were originally recommended to construct state office space and expanded parking totaling 479,000 square feet for a total cost of $350.9 million in state funding, be withdrawn. As such, the subcommittee did not recommend approval of these projects. In addition, related to Project C35, the subcommittee recommended approval of a letter of intent requiring the State Public Works Division to report to the Interim Finance Committee on a quarterly basis or some other frequency, providing but not limited to updates on the building acquisitions that will occur over the 23-25 biennium, a status of required tenant improvements, impacts to the buildings and grounds budget, including operational and utility costs, and the identification of any additional staffing needs in order to properly manage and maintain the new facilities. The subcommittee recommended approval of CIP Project 23C36, purchase building improvements in Las Vegas, as recommended by the governor in the budget amendment received on April 30th, 2023, funding total improvement costs of $74.5 million with general fund appropriations. Project funding would support the cost of improvements for 15 of the 18 buildings recommended for purchase. The 3 buildings for which there is no funding recommended for improvements would be the buildings anticipated to be occupied by the legislative branch. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the following projects recommended by the governor. Project 23C37, the building purchase and improvements, Carson City, recommended to be funded with $24.5 million in general obligation bonds, and Project 23P10, advanced planning state office building at the Capitol Complex in Carson City, recommended to be funded with $10.8 million in general fund appropriations. The subcommittee recommended approval of the following larger planning projects as recommended by the governor. Project 23P01, Advanced Planning Headquarters Building, Department of Public Safety, funded with $17.5 million, or $6 million, including $11.8 million in general fund appropriations and $5.8 million in highway fund appropriations. Project 23P04, Advanced Planning North Las Vegas, State Veterans Home, funded with $15.5 million in general fund appropriations. And lastly, Project 23P06, the advanced planning for the Southern Nevada Forensic Facility, funded with $18.2 million in general fund appropriations. The subcommittee further recommended that fiscal staff include back language in the CIP legislation that would approve 2-year project extensions requested by the State Public Works Divisions for the following projects. Project 19C03, Project 19C08, Project 19C16, Project 19M01, Project 19M07, Project 19M10, Project 19M29, Project 19M31, Project 19M40, Project 19M59, Project 19S02, Project 19S09, as well as Project 21C03. Based on the amendments to the Governor's 2023 2023 CIP and the subcommittee's closing recommendations approved on May 4, 2023, there was remaining state general obligation affordability of $94.2 million. Fiscal staff identified 16 construction projects, as identified in your closing packet here, and one maintenance project with a combined total cost of $94 million, and revised the funding for these projects to general obligation bonds with a corresponding reductions in general fund appropriations in accordance with the subcommittee's directive for fiscal staff to identify projects originally recommended by the governor to be funded with general fund appropriations that could instead be funded by general obligation bonds. These projects are shaded in gray on the attachment project list table, and that's identified with the rows shaded in gray in your 15-page table, project table. Finally, the subcommittee recommended authority for fiscal staff to make any technical adjustments as necessary. In addition, fiscal staff received new information regarding CIP Project 23C37. As noted previously, the subcommittee did not recommend approval of this project, 23C37, Building Purchase and Improvements Carson City, originally recommended to be funded with $24.5 million in state general obligation bonds. At the time of the subcommittee closing, the State Public Works Division did not have a purchase price identified, and therefore it was unclear whether the $24.5 million, as recommended, would have been sufficient to support the building purchase. On Monday, May 8, 2023, the Department of Administration notified fiscal staff that a tentative agreement had been reached for the purchase of an office building at 3850 Arrowhead Drive in Carson City, identified as Project 23C37. The estimated project cost for the building purchase and tenant improvement totals $22.3 million, which includes $18.5 million for the cost of purchasing the building and $3.8 million for tenant improvements. The project justification indicates the purchase of this building would be less expensive than the remodel of existing state office buildings or the construction of a new state office building in Carson City. If approved, the office building is anticipated to be purchased by the state in fiscal year 2024. Options for the committee's consideration on page 7 of your document. Option A, do not approve CIP Project 23C37 Building Purchase and Improvements Carson City for a total of $24.5 million funded with state general obligation bonds as recommended by the subcommittee. Or option B, approve CIP Project 23C37 Building Purchase and Improvements Carson City with a revised cost of $22.3 million funded with general fund appropriations.
Thank you very much. And I believe we have a couple questions. Director Robb, would you mind coming up for just a couple questions? Thank you very much for joining us. How many square feet did this building end up being?
Jack Raw for the records. Thank you for the question. 96,000 square feet.
96,000 straight.
96,014, I think.
Okay. 9614?
014.
014. Okay.
That's off the top of my head.
Is there
but
a
I know
reason
I'm
we
close.
can't have 96,015?
I can try.
You know,
Check
because
her
I
off
think
the
we
record.
could save some money, if you don't mind me asking. I think we could save some money, actually, if it was 96,013.
Jack Raw for the record. I will try.
Thank you very much. You know, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno also has some questions, so I'll let her go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Robb. I know you've been working late. It came on when I didn't push it. Don't like this button. Thank you, Mr. Robb. I know you've been working really hard finding buildings throughout the state and saving us some money. Thank you for working so hard on this building. I know there was a lot that went into it. Do you have the keys to this building?
Jack Raw for the record. Yes, we do have the keys. We can give it to her at any time. I actually have staff over there right now meeting the owner at 9 o'clock to look at getting some furniture that is in the building put back together. And that is part of our purchase and sale agreement. It comes with all the cubes, and some of them are dismantled, and we need them put back together. So we have the keys, so the owner and his rep can get in. They had to call us to get in this morning.
Awesome. So With the extra square footage that you were talking about, is that where you're storing that furniture, or?
Jack Rowe for the record. The furniture that is dismantled is on half of the third floor. The rest of the building is totally furnished at this point, which saves us considerable amount of money. And all the electrical, all the IT is into those locations where the cubes and the offices are also. So that'll save us money going forward.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you looking at being extremely fiscally responsible with the state's money as we look at buildings. And Madam Chair?
Thank you very much. So just one more clarification. So the 1 square foot more, so if we go from 96,014 to 96,015, that's where the furniture is going?
Jack Rowe for the record. Yes, we will put furniture in that square foot too.
Thank you very much. Director Rob, we're having fun at your expense.
I feel
but we
that.
couldn't help ourselves this morning because we know how hard you've worked. So thanks for letting us have the square foot for the furniture.
Thank you.
You very much. And with
Okay.
that, I would accept a motion, Assemblywoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve option B as read by staff.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman, and that is to approve the CIP Project 23C37 building purchase and improvements in Carson City with a revised cost of $22.3 million funded with general fund appropriations, and we will also approve subcommittee recommendations. Do I have a second? Senator Canizaro? And any questions, discussion? Thank you very much. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Nay from Senator Titus. And with that, motion passes. And thank you, Director, for letting us laugh for just a minute at your expense. So thank you. We'll move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my 2 subcommittee reports, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Ms. Mangoba, welcome. And we'll try not to do anything at your expense. So go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. For the record, Jamie Mangoba with the LCB Fiscal Analysis Division, and I'm here to present the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP Closing Report for the Nevada System of Higher Education. On May 5, 2023, the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP completed its review of the Nevada System of Higher Education, which I will refer to as NSHE, budget recommendations in the executive budget for the 2023-25 biennium. The subcommittee's action resulted in a decrease of general fund appropriations of $1.1 million in fiscal year 24 and $1.2 million in fiscal year 25. The subcommittee approved the following closing actions. Related to the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, or WICHE, the subcommittee recommended approval of total funding of $2.2 million over the 2023-25 biennium, which includes general fund appropriations of $2 million and loan repayment revenues of $205,990. For support of the Professional Student Exchange Program, the Health Professional Education Program, and the Psychology Internship Program for the WICHE loans and stipends budget. The subcommittee recommended to reissue a letter of intent allowing WICHE to reallocate student slots between fields to meet student demand, to instruct WICHE to report to the IFC within 30 days of any such reallocations, and directed fiscal staff to include language in the Authorizations Act to allow WICHE to balance forward unexpended fee revenues received after May 15th of each year to support the Health Professional Education Program. The subcommittee recommended the WICHE administration budget be closed as recommended by the governor. Related to the higher education funding formula and performance funding pool for instructional budgets, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to reduce general fund appropriations by $15.6 million in each year of the fiscal year 2023 and 25 biennium, resulting from a decrease in weighted student credit hours through caseload adjustments. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation that Great Basin College and Western Nevada College receive general fund appropriations of $551,580 and $313,980 respectively in each fiscal year of the 2023-25 biennium for small institution funding. The subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $5.6 million for the University of Nevada, Reno, and $4.5 million for the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in each year of the 2023-25 biennium to fund research space operations and maintenance funding as recommended by the governor. The subcommittee recommended approval to suspend the funding formula, distribution component, and allocate general fund appropriations to each of the instructional institutions using the traditional base, maintenance, and enhancement decision unit model. This recommendation resulted in no net change to the total general fund appropriations for the 7 instructional formula budgets, as the WSCH, or the weighted student credit hour value, is an output calculation as part of the funding formula distribution. Suspending the distribution component results in there being no output calculation for the WSCH value. However, the subcommittee directed NSHE to work with the Governor's Finance Office and the Fiscal Analysis Division to apply a methodology consistent with the current formula policy to calculate such a value for use if a caseload decision unit based on WSCH is included in the budget requested by the Board of Regents for the 2025-27 biennium. Given the potential for a new funding methodology to be presented during the 2025 legislative session, if a funding formula study is approved over the 2023-24 interim, and the uncertainty of what direction may come out of such a study, the subcommittee recommended that NSHE present and submit a budget for the 2025-27 biennium in a manner consistent with the approach that is approved by the legislature for the 2023-25 biennium, in the event that a new funding formula or methodology has not been developed in preparing the 2025-27 biennium budget, and or in order to compare the impacts of a recommendation to implement a new funding formula or methodology. The subcommittee recommended approval to continue existing policy to set aside 20% of the total general funds appropriated to each instructional formula budget for the performance funding pool, based on actions recommended by the subcommittee regarding the components of the higher education formula. Performance funding levels totaled to $108.8 million in fiscal year 24 and $109.9 million in fiscal year 25. As each institution achieved 100% of its fiscal year 22 performance target, the subcommittee recommended to include fiscal year 24 performance funding in each institution's general fund appropriation, eliminating the need for the institutions to submit work programs for IFC consideration to facilitate a known transfer of performance funding for fiscal year 24. Related to the restoration of general fund reductions approved by the 2021 legislature, the subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $37.4 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium to restore the budget reductions approved by the 2021 legislature for the 2021-23 biennium. When considering general fund restorations of approximately $46.5 million in each fiscal year of the 2023-25 biennium within the base budget for positions funded with American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds during the 2021-23 biennium, the subcommittee's recommendations would fully restore all general fund reductions approved by the 2021 legislature as recommended by the governor. The subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $10.1 million over the 2023-25 biennium for UNR and UNLV to increase the number of graduate assistant positions, and also recommended $9.9 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium for UNR and UNLV to increase graduate assistant stipends. The subcommittee recommended approval of general fund appropriations of $1 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium for support of summer teacher education courses at UNR, UNLV, CSN, GBC, and NSC, and establishing a budget policy that these summer courses are intended to be supported with state general fund appropriations and student-derived revenues in the state-supported operating budgets on an ongoing basis. The subcommittee recommended approval of student-derived non-general fund revenues for the 7 formula instructional institutions, 4 professional schools, and the prison education budget as recommended by the governor for the 2023-25 biennium. The subcommittee recommended to continue the existing policy initially adopted by the 2013 legislature that non-general fund revenues, for example, registration fees, non-resident tuition, and miscellaneous student fees, should not be used to offset the amount of general fund appropriations that would otherwise be budgeted. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended inclusion of back language in the 2023 Authorizations Act that would allow NSHE to balance forward unexpended non-general fund revenues to the next fiscal year, as well as the authorization to expend increases in student-derived revenues without IFC approval, but with a required reporting to the IFC. Regarding the DRI, Desert Research Institute, or DRI funding formula, the subcommittee recommended approval of additional general fund appropriations totaling $1.1 million over the 2023-25 biennium, inclusive of a technical adjustment for institutional support and research administration functions of the DRI, based upon the existing DRI funding formula policy and as recommended by the governor. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to change the funding policy for the DRI's budget by eliminating the existing DRI-specific formula and directed the DRI to build future biennial budgets using the base, maintenance, and enhancement model. The subcommittee recommended approval of additional general fund appropriations totaling $738,807 over the 2023-25 biennium to increase funding for personnel expenditures, which in part would support funding 2.15 full-time equivalent positions, inclusive of a technical adjustment to remove cost of living increases of $50,199 in each fiscal year of the 2023-25 biennium. The subcommittee further recommended approval of additional general fund appropriations of $511,294 over the 2023-25 biennium for increased operating and maintenance expenditures, a reduction totaling $747,154 over the 2023-25 biennium when compared to the governor's recommendation as a result of removing funding associated with consumer price index adjustments. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommended 2023-25 biennium funding levels for 16 NSHE non-formula, state-supported operating budgets in the executive budget. The subcommittee further recommended approval of the governor's recommended 2023-25 biennium funding levels for the UNR School of Medicine, the UNLV William S. Boyd School of Law, the UNLV School of Dental Medicine, and the UNLV School of Medicine budgets. The subcommittee recommended to issue a letter of intent directing NSHE to provide reports to the IFC of expenditures funded by general fund appropriations approved by the 2023 legislature for the UNR and UNLV intercollegiate athletics budgets in fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. The subcommittee also recommended the issuance of a letter of intent instructing NSHE to provide a report to the IFC over the 2023-24 interim, specifically identifying new positions created and positions eliminated by the Board of Regents compared to the positions approved in the budget by the 2023 legislature for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. The letter of intent would additionally instruct NSHE to clearly denote positions approved and eliminated by the Board of Regents as compared to the positions approved in the state-supported budgets by the 2023 legislature when preparing the 2025-27 biennium budget. The subcommittee recommended that language previously approved in the General Appropriations Act continue to be included in the 2023 Appropriations Act, including a language to continue NSHI's existing authority to transfer general fund appropriations between state-supported budget accounts, subject to the recommendation of the governor and the approval of the IFC. Lastly, the subcommittee recommended approval of fiscal staff requests to make technical adjustments as necessary. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. And with that, I would accept a motion to approve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Move to approve.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. A second from Senator Canizaro. Any comments, questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Kucera, you are up.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. John Kucera, LCB Fiscal for the record. This morning I'll be presenting the joint subcommittee report from the Human Services closing for Medicaid in the Director's Office on Monday, May 8th, just a couple days ago. The Joint Subcommittee on Human Services has completed its review of the Department of Health and Human Services Director's Office and Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy and has made the following recommendations for the 23-25 biennium budget. The closing actions taken by members of the subcommittee have resulted in a decrease in general fund appropriations of $42.2 million in fiscal year 24 and $27.6 million in fiscal year 25 when compared to the governor's recommended budget. Adjustments are inclusive of rate changes approved at the statewide closing on May 1st, 2023. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the subcommittee, beginning with the Intergovernmental Transfer Program, or IGT, budget 3157. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to restructure the disproportionate share hospital payment program, resulting in $129.5 million in reduced contributions from Clark County and Washoe County and federal Title 19 reductions of $112.5 million over the 23-25 biennium. Title 19 reductions of $112.5 million over the 23-25 biennium, limiting the program to revenues provided by a 1-cent ad valorem tax on each $100 of assessed value of taxable property. To offset the decrease in state net benefit associated with the recommended program restructure, a general fund appropriation increase of $59.1 million over the 23-25 biennium was recommended for approval in the Medicaid budget. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to increase the share of federal medical assistance percentage, or FMAP claiming, provided to Clark County from 60 to 87.5%, resulting in $3.6 million in decreased intergovernmental transfer revenue received from Clark County, and an offsetting increase of $3.6 million in general fund appropriations in the Medicaid budget. Moving on to the administration budget 3158. The subcommittee did not recommend approval of the governor's recommendation to eliminate all revenues and expenditures associated with dedicated support for the public option. Instead, the subcommittee recommended general fund appropriations of $3.7 million in fiscal year 24 and $1.3 million in fiscal year 25 to continue support for the public option, including 5 associated positions in a dedicated public option budget to isolate program operations from Medicaid and checkup programs housed within the Medicaid administration budget. Funding levels recommended by the subcommittee align with total funding for the public option budget as requested by the agency. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of preparatory activities related to the statewide expansion of the Medicaid Managed Care Program totaling $3.8 million, of which $1.9 million is general fund over the 23-25 biennium, including 2 new positions and contractual expenditures. The expansion would include populations currently served by managed care organizations throughout all regions of the state. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to eliminate a net 1 position totaling reductions of $148,330, including a $974,193 general fund increase over the 23-25 biennium, including the elimination of 11 positions previously funded with American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds, and the addition of 10 new positions, which include 4 positions to support the private hospital provider tax program, 1 position to support third-party liability, 1 fair hearing support position, 2 tenancy support positions, and 2 positions to support the expansion of the Certified Community Behavioral Health Center program. The subcommittee also recommended approval of an additional position to support the private hospital provider tax program not included in the governor's recommended budget, funded with private hospital provider tax revenue and federal funds, totaling $81,840 in fiscal year 24 and $112,608 in fiscal year 25. The subcommittee also recommended $549,924, of which $274,962 is general fund over the 23-25 biennium, not included in the governor's recommended budget, to fund one unclassified agency manager position to support compliance activities, one social services manager position to support behavioral health initiative and associated expenditures beginning October 2023. The subcommittee recommended approval of $5 million, including $2.8 million in general fund over the 23-25 biennium to support implementation and ongoing costs of an all-payer claims database. Finally, the subcommittee recommended approval of $1 million, including $500,000 in general fund each year of the 23-25 biennium, not included in the governor's recommended budget, to provide dedicated waiver support personnel and/or contractual expenditures. Moving to the increased quality of nursing care, budget account 3160, the subcommittee directed the agency to seek federal approval to increase the federal medical assistance percentage rate, or FMAP rate, associated with nursing facility supplemental payments, and recommended the inclusion of $9.3 million in additional federal funding in the Medicaid budget to provide enhanced compensation to nursing facility providers. The subcommittee also recommended the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to report on progress obtaining enhanced federal financial participation and related enhanced compensation for nursing facility providers. Moving to the improved healthcare quality and access, budget account 3177. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation, as adjusted, of a new private hospital provider tax and budget, including private hospital provider tax revenue of $572.3 million, transfers to the Medicaid budget totaling $405.4 million to fund the non-federal share of supplemental and directed payments totaling $1.059 billion, and transfers to the Medicaid administrative budget to fund administrative activities, including 5 positions and associated expenditures totaling $886,272 over the 23-25 biennium. Approval was provided contingent upon approval of Senate Bill 435 of the 23 legislative session or other enabling legislation. The subcommittee also recommended the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to submit semi-annual reports to the Interim Finance Committee detailing the implementation status of the program, the amount of private hospital provider tax assessed and collected, and total supplemental and directed payments made to each hospital entity. Moving to the Nevada Checkup Program, budget 3178. Based on revised caseload projections, the subcommittee recommended approval of $2 million, including $504,101 in general fund over the 23-25 biennium, to support average monthly checkup caseloads of 23,394 in fiscal year 24 and 24,445 in fiscal year 25. The subcommittee recommended approval of mandatory provider rate changes as adjusted following the March 23 caseload projection update, totaling reductions of $1.5 million, including $386,302 in general fund decrease in fiscal year 24, and reductions of $680,697, including a $187,022 general fund decrease in fiscal year 25. The subcommittee also recommended approval of discretionary rate increases to align with recommended approvals in the Medicaid budget to provide a 5% rate increase to physicians and dentists. In the same motion, the subcommittee recommended a 5% rate increase for skilled nursing facilities, which is not a correct provider type in the checkup program. To correct the correct rate increase and provider type should have recommended a rate increase for advanced practice registered nurses to equal the rate paid to physicians. To clarify, major closing issue 2 within the Nevada checkup budget includes $1.3 million or $358,382 general fund over the 23-25 biennium to provide a 5% rate increase for physicians, a 5% rate increase for dentists, and rate increases for advanced practice registered nurses, including certified nurse midwives, to equal the rates paid to physicians. Consistent with its recommendations for the Medicaid budget, the subcommittee did not approve the governor's recommendation to generally decrease applied behavior analyst rates to match the median comparable rates provided by other states. Instead, the subcommittee recommended approval of $3,494, including $942 in general fund, over the 23-25 biennium to support changes only to those applied behavior analysis, or ABA, rates recommended to increase relative to the median rate of comparable states beginning July 2023. Also consistent with recommended approvals in the Medicaid budget, the subcommittee recommended approval of $294,619, including $80,129 in general fund, over the 23-25 biennium to support the expansion of the Certified Community Behavioral Health Center program. As recommended by the governor, the subcommittee recommended approval of an adjusted decrease totaling $17,708, including $4,830 in general fund decrease over the 23-25 biennium to eliminate biofeedback and neurotherapy services in the checkup program. Next is Nevada Medicaid, budget 3243. The subcommittee recommended approving revised approving revised Medicaid March 2023 caseload projections, resulting in decreased total funding from $837.7 million to $548.7 million over the 23-25 biennium, which is a decrease of $289 million. A general fund appropriations decrease from $140.8 million to $89.6 million, which is a $51.2 million decrease over the 23-25 biennium. The updated caseload projections estimate an average monthly Medicaid caseload of 876,789 in fiscal year 24 and 845,877 in fiscal year 25. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendations based on revised March 2023 caseload projections, including $79.6 million, of which $11 million is general fund and $6.4 million are county funds, over the 23-25 biennium to increase waiver slots for the state's 3 approved Medicaid home and community-based waiver programs, including an increase of 687 slots for the waiver for individuals with intellectual disabilities and related conditions, an increase of 461 slots for the waivers for persons with physical disabilities, and an increase of 1,228 slots for the waiver for the frail elderly in order to serve projected caseloads and reduce wait lists to under 90 days. The subcommittee recommended approval of updated FMAP rates reflecting the April 2023 projection provided by the Federal Funds Information for State Service, including reduction in the fiscal year 25 rates to 60.75 for standard Medicaid, an 8.2% percentage point reduction from governor recommended, and 72.53% for checkup, a 0.57 percentage point reduction from the governor recommended figure. As adjusted for updated FMAP rates and inflation rates as provided by Moody's Analytics, the subcommittee recommended approval of mandatory rate increases totaling $189.0 million, including $80.6 million in general fund over the 23-25 biennium, compared to $527.1 million, including $133.1 million in general fund as recommended by the governor. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of an adjusted $233.3 million of $53.5 million general fund over the 23-25 biennium to fund discretionary rate increases, including 5% for physicians and dentists, an increase to $25 per hour for personal care service providers, an average 26.9 rate increase for providers of services to individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, including adjustments to adjust the start date to July 2023 to align with companion decision units within the Aging and Disability Services Division's regional center budgets, and increases to advanced practice registered nurses and certified nurse midwives to equal the current rate paid to physicians. The subcommittee recommended approval of $25.3 million, including $6.2 million in general fund over the 23-25 biennium to provide a 10% rate increase to skilled nursing facility providers, an increase from the 5% as recommended by the governor. Following the subcommittee closing, it was discovered the governor's recommended increase to advanced practice registered nurses and certified nurse midwives to equal the rate of physicians did not consider the associated recommendation to provide a 5% increase to physician rates. As a result, the committees may wish to consider the inclusion of $1.7 million, including $509,904 general fund, over the 23-25 biennium in Decision Unit E373 to support an additional increase to rates paid to advanced practice registered nurse providers to equal the rates paid to physicians, including the 5% rate increase recommended for approval in Decision Unit E125. Including the recommended adjustment, funding would total $36.3 million, including $10.7 million in general fund, over the 23-25 biennium. The decision for consideration by the committees at the bottom of page 9 of your packet asks, rather than approving the subcommittee's recommendation for Decision Unit E373, do the committees wish to approve a total of $36.3 million, including $10.7 million general fund, over the 23-25 biennium for Decision Unit E373 to provide for rate increases for advanced practice registered nurses to equal the rates paid to physicians, including the 5% increase recommended for physicians in Decision Unit E125. If approved, as reimbursement rates are aligned between the Medicaid and checkup programs, a matching rate increase would be applied to advanced practice registered nurse provider types in the checkup budget.
Thank you so very much. Are there any questions? I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve this decision unit as stated by staff.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Canizaro. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Please go on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Cusero, LCB Fiscal. Moving on to page 10 of your closing packet. Related to personal care services, the subcommittee recommended the addition of Appropriations Act language requiring providers of personal care services to pay a minimum wage of not less than $16 per hour to direct care staff, consistent with recommendations made in the Aging and Disability Services Division closing. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of 2 management analyst positions and associated expenditures in the Medicaid administration budget to review compliance of the minimum wage requirement for personal care services direct care workers totaling $335,152, including $167,577 general fund dollars over the 23-25 biennium. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of $11.4 million, including $2.8 million general fund dollars over the 23-25 biennium to fund an approximate 51% increase to frail elderly waiver residential facility for group providers and an approximate 98% increase to frail elderly waiver assisted living facility provider types not included in the governor's recommended budget. The subcommittee also recommended approval of $6.7 million, including $2.2 million in general fund over the 23-25 biennium to fund a 15% increase for home health providers, including private duty nurses, not included in the governor's recommended budget. The subcommittee did not approve the governor's recommendation to generally decrease applied behavior analyst rates to match the median comparable rates provided by other states. Instead, the subcommittee recommended approval of a net increase of $4.6 million, including $1.7 million general fund over the 2023-25 biennium, when compared to the funding recommended by the governor to support changes to only those applied behavior analysis rates recommended to increase relative to the median rate of comparable states beginning July 2023. No applied behavior analysis rates were recommended to decrease, and the subcommittee recommended approval of Appropriations Act language requiring the director of the Department of Health and Human Services to increase rates as recommended in the Medicaid and checkup budgets. As recommended by the governor, the subcommittee recommended approval of service expansions totaling an adjusted $27.9 million, including $5.4 million in general fund over the 23-25 biennium to support wearable cardiovascular defibrillators, dental services for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities age 21 or over, and 6 additional certified community behavioral health centers. The subcommittee recommended approval of the elimination of neurotherapy and biofeedback services totaling reductions of $7.1 million, including $2.5 million general fund reduction over the 23-25 biennium. As adjusted and recommended by the governor, the subcommittee recommended approval of expanding eligibility for pregnant women with incomes up to 200% of the federal poverty limit totaling $37.3 million, including $14.5 million in general fund over the 23-25 biennium. Moving to prescription drug rebate, budget account 3245. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation of $416.3 million in prescription drug rebate revenue each year of the 23-25 biennium, and also recommended the issuance of a letter of intent directing the agency to submit a report to the Interim Finance Committee on an evaluation of methods for projecting prescription drug rebate revenue, the associated general fund offset, as well as methodologies used to determine the inflation rate applied to projected prescription drug expenditures. Moving to the Director's Office Indigent Hospital Care, Budget 3244. The subcommittee recommended continuation of the methodology approved by the 2021 legislature to utilize property tax revenues to support counties' responsibilities to pay the non-federal share of certain Medicaid expenditures in the county match population, which includes $41 million over the biennium, and reimburse counties for unpaid charges, $2 million over the biennium. Similarly, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to utilize unmet free care assessments to support the non-federal share of the Indigent Accident Fund Upper Payment Limit Program, which includes $52.4 million over the biennium, and provide a state net benefit for the Indigent Accident Fund Upper Payment Limit Program, including $112,612 over the biennium. Finally, the Director's Office Upper Payment Limit Holding Account, Budget Account 3260. The subcommittee recommended approval of the continuation of the UPL holding account as recommended by the governor in the 23-25 biennium, and language in the 23 Appropriations Act to authorize the continuation of the account in the 23-25 biennium. The subcommittees also provided authority to fiscal staff to make technical adjustments as necessary. Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
A+, thank you. With that, I see no questions. I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve all other closing items in this closing report as stated by staff.
Thank you very much. I'll accept the motion from Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, a second from Senator Canizaro. Any questions? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question, a comment. 2 things, really. Medicaid budget changes, I do support, and although I'm a practicing physician, none of this will change any of my income and has no effect on me. So I feel I can vote on this. Second, although I will vote in support, I remain vehemently against the public option. However, as stated when we heard this in subcommittee way back when, our majority leader made it clear that it is current law, and so I will be supporting this budget. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to echo my colleagues' comments that I'm so pleased to see we're increasing rates for Medicaid, our physicians, our nurses. I think it's critically important. I'd love to see even more increases for that, and I love to see this is what the state is spending money on. I also just have to say, though, I am opposed to funding the public option as well. And the way this is presented, it's kind of like a four-course dinner. If you don't like one of them, you still like the other three. So I'll be voting in favor of it, but wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank our staff, and I want to thank the chairs of the subcommittee because they did so much work on these budgets, and in particular, adding some money for the frail and elderly waiver and restoring some funding that was going to be cut for behavioral analysis, which is the work that's done with children with autism, I think are incredibly important. I too have issues with the public option and understand what was presented related to that. I'm just concerned about basically access to care and that the required discounts will force providers and facilities to leave or close. And so it's sort of a big picture thing. It's not the dollars necessarily. It's about what's going to happen if we constrain the number of dollars that are within the state of Nevada for healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Kucera. Okay, we will now hear from Ms. Ellsworth.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kimber Ellsworth for the record, Fiscal Analysis Division. I'm here to present the Joint Subcommittee Closing Report on the DHHS Aging and Disability Services Division. The Joint Subcommittee on Human Services has completed its review of the budgets for the Aging and Disability Services Division of the Department of Health and Human Services. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee resulted in additional general fund appropriations of $2.5 million in fiscal year 2024 and $1.3 million in fiscal year 2025 compared to the governor's recommended budget. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the subcommittees. Administration, Budget 3151. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for $1.2 million, including $246,964 general fund appropriations to fund 10 new positions and associated costs to support ongoing agency operations, including 1 IT technician, 3 IT professionals, and 1 IT manager to support information technology needs, 1 administrative assistant, 1 personnel technician, 1 personnel analyst, and 1 personnel officer to provide human resources support, and 1 administrative services officer to support central fiscal services. Senior RX and Disability RX, Budget 3156. The subcommittee recommended approval of decreasing Healthy Nevada funds by $19,667 over the 2023 to 25 biennium to support caseload adjustments for the Senior RX Disability RX program to reflect updated caseload projections as of March 2023. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for a revenue-neutral change to combine the Senior RX and Disability RX program expenditure categories into a single category for prescription assistance, consistent with Assembly Bill 35 of the 2021 legislature, which amended NRS 439630 to consolidate the programs. Consumer Health Assistance, Budget 3204. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for general fund appropriations of $81,000 in each year of the 2023 to 25 biennium to fund one-time costs for improvements to the Office for Consumer Health Assistance, or OCHA, case management system. Additionally, the executive budget includes additional general fund appropriations of $449,065 over the 2023 to 25 biennium to replace revenue previously transferred from the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange, DPBH Healthcare Facilities, DPBH Behavioral Health Prevention and Treatment budgets to support a portion of ongoing personnel and associated operating costs that will not be received due to decreased associated billable activities. The subcommittee deferred the decision whether to approve the general funds to the full committee. As background, the shift in billable activities is attributable in part to the implementation of Assembly Bill 469 from the 2019 legislative session, which prohibits a consumer from being balance billed under certain circumstances. And through subsequent regulations, the agency designated employees of the OCHA to conduct certain arbitrations. NRS 439B 754 subpart 7 provides a means for the agency to bill for the costs of certain arbitrator claims. However, NRS 353249 requires all monies collected by the state to be deposited in the general fund unless a specific statute authorizes the agency to retain the funds. As of April 7, 2023, the agency has invoiced approximately $186,266 in arbitration charge revenue since it began recovering costs in July 2022, and has recovered $136,587 in actual receipts between July 1st, 2022 and March 31st, 2023, or $182,116 annualized. However, the executive budget does not include any arbitration charge revenues over the 2023 to 25 biennium, and no statutory authority currently exists for the agency to retain the new revenue in the OCHA budget. Furthermore, because budgeted revenues for other billable activities have not been realized, the governor recommends a supplemental general fund appropriation to fund a projected fiscal year 2023 shortfall in the OCHA budget. The committees may wish to consider introducing a committee bill draft request to authorize the agency to retain revenue collected to recover costs associated with certain arbitrator claims and reduce the level of general fund appropriations otherwise needed in this budget. If such legislation is considered, the statutory changes could be effective and applied so that the agency is authorized to utilize the arbitration charge revenues collected in fiscal year 2023 and may reduce or eliminate the need for the recommended supplemental appropriation. The committees may wish to consider one of the following options, and these are going to be labeled B1 and B2 because somehow we lost A. B1, approve general fund appropriations of $449,065 over the 2023 to 25 biennium to replace revenue previously transferred from the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange, DPPH Healthcare Facilities, and DPPH Behavioral Health Prevention and Treatment budgets to support a portion of ongoing OCHA personnel and associated operating costs as recommended by the governor. Or B2, approve arbitration charge revenue of $364,232 and general fund appropriations of $84,833 over the 2023 to 25 biennium to replace revenue previously transferred from the Silver State Health Insurance Exchange, DPPH Healthcare Facilities, and DPPH Behavioral Health Prevention and Treatment budgets to support a portion of ongoing OCHA personnel and associated operating costs, contingent on enabling legislation to retain arbitration charge revenue in this budget. If this option is approved, the committees should request enabling legislation to be drafted to authorize the agency to retain revenue collected in fiscal year 2023 and going forward to recover costs associated with certain arbitrator claims.
Thank you very, very much. Any questions? Okay, I'll take a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to accept option B2 in addition to providing authority to include enabling legislation to be drafted to authorize the agency to retain revenue collected in fiscal year 2023 and going forward to recover costs associated with the certain arbitrator claims.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Bacchus, second by Senator Canizaro. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Please go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kimber Ellsworth, Fiscal Analysis Division for the record. The next budget is Early Intervention Service, Budget 3208. The subcommittee recommended approval of caseload and staffing adjustments to reflect updated caseload projections as of March 2023, which result in net additional funding of $1.2 million, including $1.4 million general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium. The adjustments include the elimination of 11 vacant developmental specialist positions to align caseload staffing with the legislatively approved ratio of 1 caseworker position to every 19 clients and 1 supervisor position to every 7 caseworkers. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to combine the state clinic and community providers caseload service cost categories into a single expenditure category to eliminate the required 50-50 split service delivery model, and recommended issuing a letter of intent to the agency to report on a semi-annual basis to the Interim Finance Committee on the status of the Early Intervention Services Program. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to increase the rate paid to early intervention services community providers by $229.88, or 40.7%, from $565 to $794.88 per child per month, based on results of a rate study, with the March 2023 updated caseload projections resulting in general fund appropriations of $10.2 million over the 2023 to 25 biennium. Additionally, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to increase the monthly cost per child receiving state clinic provided services by 8.3%, from $270 to $292.41 per child per month, based on an 8.3% annual inflation rate, with the March 2023 updated caseload projections resulting in general fund appropriations of $1 million over the 2023 to 25 biennium. For the Autism Treatment Assistance Program, Budget 3209, the subcommittee recommended approval of caseload and staffing adjustments to reflect updated caseload projections as of March 2023 and eliminate the projected wait list, which results in net additional funding of $2.1 million, including $2.2 million general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium. The adjustments include a net decrease of 1 vacant developmental specialist caseworker position. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for $192,416, including $157,831 in general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium to fund a new psychological development counselor position to provide clinical oversight and facilitate eligibility determinations. For the Focus and MFP budget 3271, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer the Facility Outreach and Community Integration Services, or FOCUS, and the Money Follows the Person, or MFP, programs, including 13 existing staff, which coordinate efforts to transition recipients from institutional care to home and community-based settings, from the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy budget to the Aging and Disability Services Division in a new standalone budget. Family Preservation Program, Budget 3166. The subcommittee recommended approval of caseload adjustments for the Family Preservation Program to reflect updated caseload projections as of March 2023, which result in additional general fund appropriations of $103,972 over the 2023 to 25 biennium. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to increase the Family Preservation Program allotment paid to qualifying families by $112, or 29.9%, from $374 to $486 per family per month, based on cumulative average federal supplemental security income, or SSI, cost of living increases, with the March 2023 updated caseload projections resulting in general fund appropriations of $1.7 million over the 2023 to 25 biennium. For the Developmental Services Regional Centers budgets 3280, 3279, and 3167, the subcommittee recommended approval of caseload and staffing adjustments to reflect updated caseload and waiver waitlist projections as of March 2023 for the supported living arrangements, family support respite, and jobs and day training programs at the Sierra Regional Center, Desert Regional Center, and Rural Regional Center, which results in additional funding of $74 million, including $37.5 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium, which is a net increase of $11.7 million, or $7 million, in general fund appropriations compared to the funding in the executive budget. The adjustments include a net increase of 20 positions, including 19 additional positions at the Desert Regional Center, 3 additional positions at the Sierra Regional Center, and a net decrease of 2 positions at the Rural Regional Center to align staffing with projected caseload growth. The recommendation funds projected caseload growth and elimination of the projected wait list for those waiting for more than 90 days for a Medicaid home and community-based waiver for intellectual disabilities and related conditions slot. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for $105.7 million, including $47.6 million general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium, as adjusted based on March 2023 updated FMAP rate projections to increase the rates paid to providers of intellectual and developmental disabilities waiver services, and recommended issuing a letter of intent to the agency to report on a semi-annual basis to the Interim Finance Committee during the 2023 to 25 biennium on the status of the rate increases and associated provider capacity and wait lists for intellectual and developmental disabilities waiver services. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for $1.9 million, including $1.5 million general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium to fund 2 contracted board-certified behavior analysts, 1 at Sierra Regional Center and 1 at Rural Regional Center, and 9 new positions across the 3 regional centers for the Youth Intensive Support Services Program to provide additional expertise, oversight, and service coordination to properly support individuals with high behavioral and complex needs, with the goal of keeping individuals in Nevada as an alternative to institutional care out of state. Rather than approving the governor's recommendation to increase the fiscal intermediary program allotment by $200 per month, the subcommittee recommended to increase the fiscal intermediary program allotment paid to qualifying families by $229, an additional increase of $29, from $450 to $679 per family per month based on annual consumer price index increases from 2006 to 2023, funded with $537,692, including $378,869 in general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium. For the Home and Community-Based Services budget, 101-3266, the subcommittee recommended approval of caseload adjustments to reflect updated caseload projections as of March 2023 and eliminate the projected wait list for community-based care programs, which result in additional general fund appropriations of $1.3 million over the 2023 to 25 biennium. The governor's recommendation also includes community-based care program staffing adjustments to align with projected caseload growth, which result in the addition of 37 new positions, 27 in fiscal year 2024 and 10 in fiscal year 2025, and additional costs of $5.2 million, including $3.7 million general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium based on the March 2023 updated caseload projections, which is an increase of 28 positions and $3.8 million, including $2.7 million general fund appropriations compared to the amounts in the executive budget. However, given the current vacancies and potential challenges in filling all of the new positions, the subcommittee recommended approval of $1.9 million, including $1.4 million general fund appropriations in fiscal year 2024 for the added caseload staff, and that the general fund appropriations of $2.3 million for staffing in fiscal year 2025 be placed in a restricted funds in the Interim Finance Committee contingency account, and to direct the agency to update the Interim Finance Committee on its efforts in hiring the new positions funded in fiscal year 2024 in order to demonstrate the need for the funding in fiscal year 2025. Additionally, the governor's recommendation includes adult protective services and long-term care ombudsman program staffing adjustments to align with projected caseload growth, which result in the addition of 50 new positions, 49 in fiscal year 2024 and 1 in fiscal year 2025, and additional costs of $6.9 million, including $6.8 million general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium, based on the March 2023 updated caseload projections, which is an increase of 12 positions and $2 million, including $2 million in general fund appropriations, compared to the amounts in the executive budget. However, given the current vacancies and potential challenges in filling all of the new positions, the subcommittee recommended approval of $3 million, including $3 million in general fund appropriations in fiscal year 2024 for the added caseload staff, and that the general fund appropriations of $3.9 million for staffing in fiscal year 2025 be placed as restricted funds in the interim finance committee contingency account, and to direct the agency to update the interim finance committee on its efforts in hiring the new positions funded in fiscal year 2024 in order to demonstrate the need for the funding in fiscal year 2025. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to increase the rates paid to providers of personal care services for the Community Options Program for the elderly and Personal Assistance Services programs to $25 per hour effective January 1st, 2024, funded with general fund appropriations of $746,763 in fiscal year 2024 and $1.4 million in fiscal year 2025, as adjusted based on the March 2023 updated caseload projections. Additionally, to ensure that the increased rate benefits personal care services direct care workers, the subcommittee recommended the inclusion of back language in the Appropriations Act requiring providers of personal care services that receive the increased reimbursement rate of $25 per hour pay a wage to direct care workers not less than $16 per hour. And additionally recommended approval of one management analyst position and associated costs in the home and community-based services budget to review compliance of the minimum wage requirement for direct care workers, funded with general fund appropriations of $186,669 over the 2023 to 25 biennium. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for $370,211, including $365,696 general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium to reclassify 48 adult protective services social worker 2s to social worker 3s, and reclassifying 9 social work supervisor 1s to social work supervisor 2s, which is equivalent to a 1-grade salary increase, or approximately 5%, to align the adult protective services staff compensation with other protective services positions in the state. The subcommittee also recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for $1.8 million, including $1.6 million general fund appropriations over the 2023 to 25 biennium, to change the funding source for 11 positions that were established during the interim from various Federal American Rescue Plan Act grant funds to a combination of general fund appropriations, federal grants, and Medicaid administrative funds to continue funding for the positions, including 3 unclassified regional coordinators, 1 unclassified agency manager, 3 management analysts, and 4 social services program specialists. Finally, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation for a budget reorganization to group related activities, program services, and positions, including the transfer out of the Planning, Advocacy, and Community Services Unit, the Adult Protective Services and Long-Term Care Ombudsman programs, and the statewide Independent Living Council from the Home and Community-Based Services budget to new standalone budgets within the division. The Planning, Advocacy, and Community Grants Budget 3278. The subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer the Planning, Advocacy, and Community Services Unit, including 32 existing positions from various division budgets and the Nevada 211 program, to a new standalone budget within the division. The subcommittee also recommended approval of Federal American Rescue Plan Act Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds of $19.6 million in fiscal year 2024 and $281,271 in fiscal year 2025 in the Planning, Advocacy, and Community Grants budget to continue previously approved funding in the Home and Community-Based Services budget for the Planning, Advocacy, and Community Services Unit projects, consistent with action taken by the money committees in closing the COVID-19 relief programs budget. For Adult Protective Services and Long-Term Care Ombudsman, Budget 3282, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer the Adult Protective Services and Long-Term Care Ombudsman programs, including 165 positions, as adjusted based on the March 2023 updated caseload projections, from the Home and Community-Based Services budget to a new standalone budget within the division. As noted previously, the subcommittee recommended that the general fund appropriations of $2.3 million for 37 new caseload positions in fiscal year 2025 be placed as restricted funds in the interim Finance Committee contingency account, and to direct the agency to update the Interim Finance Committee on its efforts in hiring the new positions funded in fiscal year 2024 in order to demonstrate the need for the funding in fiscal year 2025. For the statewide Independent Living Council, Budget 3283, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to transfer the statewide Independent Living Council, including 2 existing positions from the Home and Community-Based Services budget to a new standalone budget within the division. The subcommittee recommended closing the following Aging and Disability Services division budgets as recommended by the governor. Commission for Persons Who Are Deaf, Budget 101-1006. Tobacco Settlement Program, Budget 262-3140. Communication Access Services, Budget 101-3206. And Applied Behavior Analysis, Budget 101-3207. Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve this closing report.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. A second from Senator Canizaro. Any discussions on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much, and thank you so much for your time. All right, next we have Mr. Malone, I believe, up. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. James Malone, for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. I will be presenting the subcommittee report for the Nevada Department of Corrections. The Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation has completed its review of the Department of Correction budgets for the 23-25 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee resulted in general fund appropriation reductions of $12.4 million in fiscal year 2024 and $14.3 million in fiscal year 2025. However, as discussed later in this closing, approximately $12.5 million of the identified reductions in fiscal year 2025 are recommended to be budgeted in the Interim Finance Committee contingency account to be available to the department under certain circumstances, and as such do not reflect savings at this time. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the Joint Subcommittee. The executive budget provided funding to house an average of 10,497 offenders in fiscal year 2024 and 10,668 offenders in fiscal year 2025, based on the offender population projections received from the JFA Institute in October 2022. The subcommittee recommended funding to house an average of 10,223 offenders in fiscal year 2024 and 10,480 offenders in fiscal year 2025, based on revised offender population projections updated in February 2023, which is an increase of 82 offenders in fiscal year 2024 and 339 offenders in fiscal year 2025 as compared to the fiscal year 2022 average actual offender population. For the department overview, the subcommittee recommended approval of adjustments to average annual offender population caseloads as included in the executive budget, which updated offender-driven expenditures at each institution and the offender store fund and the inmate welfare account, and resulted in net reductions in general fund appropriations of $2.2 million and $810,317 in other funds over the 23-25 biennium. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of $1.5 million in general fund appropriations for inflationary cost increases for food consistent with the population adjustments. And finally, the subcommittee recommended approval of transferring the cost of operating law libraries and 14 administrative assistant positions to the budget at each facility at which a law library is located, and $2.2 million in restricted general fund appropriations to fund the law libraries, resulting in a corresponding reduction of $2.2 million in transfers from the offender store fund to the inmate welfare account. For the director's office, the subcommittee recommended approval of a budget amendment for $25,000 in general fund appropriations each year over the 23-25 biennium for advertising and marketing to assist with the department's recruitment efforts. For prison medical budget 3706, the subcommittee recommended general fund appropriations of $3.9 million over the 23-25 biennium to fund adjustments to the offender-driven medical care costs based on inflation and updated offender population projections. In addition, the subcommittee recommended approval of one new pharmacy technician position to assist the department's pharmacies with prescription order fulfillment as a result of licensing 6 additional pharmacies. For the Warm Springs Correctional Center, budget account 3716, the subcommittee recommended approval of the department's proposal to continue the temporary closure through fiscal year 2024 and fund maintenance of the Warm Springs Correctional Center facility over the 23-25 biennium to include a total of 13 maintenance and correctional officer positions totaling $4.4 million in general fund appropriations, and recommended appropriating an additional $10.8 million in restricted general funds to the IFC contingency account for the phased reopening of the facility beginning fiscal year 2025, which would require the department to demonstrate to the IFC that it has filled vacant positions or is in the process of filling vacant positions, and that it can effectively and safely reopen the facility without compromising the operations of the currently open facilities prior to receiving an allocation of the funds. For the Humboldt Conservation Camp, budget 3741, the subcommittee recommended approval of the department's recommendation to close the Humboldt Conservation Camp, maintain the facility in mothball status over the 23-25 biennium, and continue the funding for 10 currently filled positions for fiscal year 2024, resulting in a reduction of $2.3 million in general fund appropriations and $25,240 in other funds over the 23-25 biennium, with the intent that the camp be permanently closed. For the Ely Conservation Camp, budget account 3747, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommendation to continue the closure of the Ely Conservation Camp and maintain the facility in mothball status over the 23-25 biennium, resulting in a reduction of $2.7 million in general fund appropriations, with the intent that the camp be permanently closed. In addition, the subcommittee recommended the issuance of a letter of intent directing the department to provide a report to the IFC by June 1st, 2024 on the status of the conservation camp consolidation plan for the 25-27 biennium, including, but not limited to, information on the department's ability to appropriately staff each camp, a visual representation of the timeline to consolidate, repurpose the facilities, and/or transfer the facilities to another entity. For the Tonopah Conservation Camp, budget account 3754, the subcommittee recommended approval of the department's recommendation to close the Tonopah Conservation Camp, maintain the facility in mothball status over the 23-25 biennium, and continue the funding for 6 currently filled positions for fiscal year 2024, resulting in a reduction of $2.7 million in general fund appropriations and $29,344 in other funds over the 23-25 biennium, with the intent that the camp be temporarily closed. In addition, the subcommittee recommended allocating up to $1.7 million in general fund appropriations to the IFC contingency account for distribution to the department should it determine that the camp is to be reopened during the 23-25 biennium. The subcommittee recommends closing the following Department of Corrections budgets as included in the executive budget and consistent with the subcommittee's closing actions taken with the Department of Corrections overview closing and the joint full committee's action during the statewide decision units closing where statewide grade increases were considered with technical or no adjustments. Correctional Programs budget 1013711. Ely State Prison budget 1013751. High Desert State Prison budget 1013762. Northern Nevada Correctional Center, budget 1013717. Nevada State Prison, budget 1013718. Southern Desert Correctional Center, budget 1013738. Lovelock Correctional Center, budget 1013759. Southern Nevada Correctional Center, budget 1013715. Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center, budget 1013761. Casa Grande Transitional Housing, budget 1013760. Northern Nevada Transitional Housing, budget 1013724. Stewart Conservation Camp, budget 1013722. Pioche Conservation Camp, budget 1013723. Three Lakes Valley Conservation Camp, budget 1013725. Wells Conservation Camp, budget 1013739. Jean Conservation Camp 1013748, Silver Springs Conservation Camp 1013749, Carlin Conservation Camp 1013752, Offender Store Fund 2403708, Inmate Welfare Account 2403763, Prison Industry 5253719, and the Prison Ranch 5253727. And that will conclude my report.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'll see if there are any questions or discussion. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A little discussion. On the Warm Springs Correctional Facility, in the subcommittee's recommendation, there's a $10.8 million to be placed in the restricted general funds IFC contingency account to reopen that facility. And if we look back at our backup documents on page 58 and 59, we've heard about the huge vacancies that we currently have in DOC. To reopen these facilities, I think it would take a minimum of 74 full-time positions, but to get it to where it really would need to be is 94. So that would be 94 officers in addition to the current vacancies that we currently have. I can completely support the $4.4 million for the mothballing and making sure that those 13, the maintenance and the corrections officer's position, to keep this facility open for future use. I just have a hard time wrapping my mind around us being able, even with the amazing compensation package we've put together, hiring those 94 people to justify placing almost $11 million in a restricted general fund IFC account. And then going over to the Tonopah Conservation Camp, I have some of the same concerns. This camp's been closed for a while, but we do need to maintain the $2.7 million for those 6 currently filled positions that are there. But the 1.7, in anticipation that camp's going to be open in this next biennium, I just don't see us getting there with the numbers. We do have, in previous budgets, we moved positions from making them firemen that would be here. I'm just not sure if we need that funding. If we could just have a little discussion on that before having a vote, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on this? Senator Goicoechea?
I just want to get clear what the Vice Chair, are you talking about shifting the 1.7 million then out of this budget for Tonopah that we had allocated? We're going to hold it in a contingency?
That would be my recommendation. We would keep the money for the mothballing of it, the 2.7, but it's been closed for, 2 sessions now? Do we really believe we're going to be able to hire those people and keep that money there?
Well, it's been closed for a session, but again, our hopes were, and again, depending on, Madam Chair, if I may, depending on, what happens, especially with the NDF and the possibility then that we could use that camp, and in fact, those 2 budgets haven't come together yet. We continue to hope that there will be at least the ability to mothball the camp. Maybe we don't need the total 2.7, but with NDF, if they can backfill and put us at least part of a professional crew in the Tonopah camp area, both to do habitat work and wildland fire suppression. But again, these will be paid, so it will take the money from somebody.
Then with that, Madam Chair, I would move for approval for this closing report, but removing the $10.8 million from the Warm Springs Correctional Center for that money to be placed into general fund, and keeping the Tonopah Conservation Camp as read by staff.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. A second from Senator Canizaro. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Goicoechea, please.
No, I think I can agree with that. It's my understanding that I know Warm Springs here is going to be taken care of, and so I'm good with that. Tonopah is my major concern, so I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And seeing no more discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much for your time. And I believe next is Ms. Johnston. When you're ready, please go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Nicolette Johnston, Fiscal Analysis Division for the record. I will be presenting the Joint Subcommittee Closing Report for the Department of Wildlife. The Joint Subcommittee on Public Safety, Natural Resources, and Transportation has completed its review of the Department of Wildlife budget recommendations in the executive budget for the 23-25 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee resulted in no increase or decrease in general fund appropriations when compared to the governor's recommended budget. The subcommittee recommended approval of the following closing actions. Director's Office, Budget Account 4460. As recommended by the governor, the subcommittee recommended approval of transfers of sportsmen's revenue of $165,977 in FY 2024 and $198,173 in FY 2025 for 3 new accounting assistant positions to support the fiscal services unit due to additional workload as a result of an increase of federal grant awards over the past several years. The subcommittee also recommended approval of Budget Amendment A2307544460 to add 1 new unclassified deputy director position funded through transfers of sportsmen's revenue of $143,743 in FY 2024 and $174,713 in FY 2025 as recommended by the governor. Conservation Education, Budget Account 4462. The subcommittee recommended approval of cost allocation reimbursements totaling $104,000 in each year of the 23-25 biennium to fund a marketing and outreach campaign to attract new potential new hunters and anglers to Nevada as recommended by the governor. Law Enforcement, Budget Account 4463. The subcommittee recommended approval of transfers of boating registration revenue in the amount of $68,324 in each year of the 23-25 biennium to restore and augment funding for the boating safety outreach program as recommended by the governor. Fisheries Management, Budget Account 4465. The subcommittee recommended approval of a transfer of sportsmen's revenue of $260,000 in FY 2024 to fund the refurbishment of the air coil cooling tower at the Mason Valley Fish Hatchery as recommended by the governor, and further advised the agency to request this type of project as a capital improvement program project in the future. The subcommittee recommended approval of a technical adjustment to establish revenue and expenditure authority of coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds totaling $2.3 million in FY 2024 and $779,875 in FY 2025 to continue funding the Lake Mead Fish Hatchery water supply line project. The subcommittee recommended approval of all other closing items within the Department of Wildlife budgets as recommended by the governor with technical adjustments noted by staff and consistent with the decision of the joint full committees in the closing hearing of the statewide decision units, where statewide compensation adjustments were considered. The subcommittee further authorized fiscal staff to make technical adjustments as necessary. The subcommittee recommended closing the following Department of Wildlife budgets as recommended by the governor with technical adjustments as noted by fiscal staff. Data and Technology Services, Budget 4461. Game Management, Budget 4464. Diversity Division, Budget 4466. Habitat, 4467. And Madam Chair, that concludes this report.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on this? If not, I will accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve this closing report as read by staff.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Canizaro. Any discussion on this motion? I'd love to say something clever here, but we've had a long morning. So with that, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much. All right, last up, Mr. Luna. Bring it home. And welcome to the class that just joined us in the back. Go ahead, Mr. Luna, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committees. Justin Luna for the record, LCB Fiscal. I'll be presenting the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP Closing Report for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources General Obligation Bond Programs. Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Education CIP completed its review of the General Obligation Bond Programs for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, DCNR, for the 2023-25 biennium. The closing recommendations of the subcommittee result in general obligation bond issuances of $32.3 million over the 2023-25 biennium. The following comments describe the more significant recommendations of the joint subcommittee. Conservation Bond Program. Subcommittee recommended approval of $16.3 million as adjusted of general obligation bonds over the 2023-25 biennium for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Conservation Bond Program that is not recommended in the executive budget based on the State Treasurer's General Obligation Debt Capacity and Affordability Report for the 2023-25 biennium, and directed fiscal staff to present the finalized plan uses of funds as part of the subcommittee's report to the full committees. The agency indicates that the $16.3 million in bond funding would support projects for the following: Division of State Parks Valley of Fire Visitor Center, Department of Wildlife statewide projects, Las Vegas Springs Preserve design work for the Origin Museum, Clark County Wetlands Park Wetland Loop Trail, DCNR grants for the Truckee and Carson Rivers corridors and watersheds, as well as grants to governmental entities and nonprofits. The next program, Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program, the subcommittee recommended approval of the governor's recommended issuances as amended of general obligation bonds totaling $13 million over the 2023-25 biennium for the Lake Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program. And the final program, Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program, subcommittee recommended approval of general obligation bonds of $3 million over the 2023-25 biennium for the Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation Grant Program, consistent with the affordability amount identified in the State Treasurer's General Obligation Debt Capacity and Affordability Report. Madam Chair, that concludes my closing report for DCNR bonds.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve this closing report as read by staff.
Thank you very much. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, second by Senator Canizaro. Any discussion on the motion? Assemblyman Hafen, any comments? Okay, all righty. With that, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. All right, with that, committee, we will move to public comment, which is our last item on the agenda. Due to time considerations and each person providing public comment, you will be limited to 2 minutes. Please call 888-475-4491, or I'm sorry, 4499, and the meeting ID number is 886-1546-3346, and then press pound. And when prompted for your meeting ID, please press pound. So we'll start here in Carson City. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association. Today is a rainy day for Nevada schools. As you know, yesterday the K-12 Budget Subcommittee recommended increasing the education budget by 26% over this biennium, $318 million more than GovRec. But action was also taken by the subcommittee to increase the education stabilization account cap from 15 to 20%, which would stash away an additional $322 million, a bigger increase for reserves than our schools. It turns out the biggest beneficiary of additional funding are charters, with a 41% increase in the biennium worth over $400 million. On the other side of the ledger, Story County will lose 5% of its total budget. Sadly, the rising tide will not lift all boats. Certainly, Nevada's strong economy and record revenue is welcome news, but it's still a rainy day for Nevada schools. Nevada ranks 48th in education funding, even behind Mississippi, and everyone knows Nevada has the largest class sizes in the nation. The crisis of educator vacancies has reached a tipping point. In the last 2 years, Nevada is projected to lose more than 15% of our teaching workforce. Nevada also has a serious problem with vacancies in classified positions, meaning we are short people who make our schools run. Nevada's severe educator shortage threatens the basic function of our school system. It's a rainy day for Nevada schools. When combining the education stabilization account with the state's rainy day fund, reserves could approach nearly $3 billion next biennium, 7 times the state's previous high of $401 million. NSEA believes it is fiscally irresponsible to continue to underfund education while overinflating reserves. When we can't retain educators or fill their positions. Throughout this session, you've heard from a parade of educators about the hardships of working in education with low pay and increasingly stressful work conditions. Next week, hundreds of educators will convene here in Carson City and in Las Vegas, umbrellas in hand, to display the intensity of the crisis in our schools. We implore you to redirect monies tomorrow from rainy day reserves to fund Time for 20, a 20% raise for Nevada educators, starting pay of $20 an hour, and average class sizes of 20 students. Today is a rainy day for Nevada schools. Thank you.
Go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Ariel Edwards, representing Nevada Hand. We are the state's largest affordable housing developer and a nonprofit organization. Nevada Hand is the only organization in Nevada who offers affordable assisted living communities. At Silver Sky and Silver Sky at Deer Springs, we provide 180 apartment units for Nevada seniors. The Medicaid reimbursements we receive only cover a fraction of the actual cost of providing 24-hour care that assist our residents with their daily living needs. And that current daily reimbursement rate is only $23 a day. So we would like to thank you all so much for making a substantial increase in provider types 57 and 59. This is such a big deal for us, and we cannot thank you all enough. Thank you, and we look forward to continuing to serve our seniors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Jenny Hunt. I am the proud director of Mariposa Language and Learning Academy in Reno. Some of you I saw yesterday. Thank you so much for your work that you're doing for all learners in Nevada. I'm a proud educator for 20 plus years in a traditional school setting as well as a charter school setting now. And so I want to just thank you for all the work that you're doing and looking to the future and really building for the long term. As the saying says, Rome wasn't built in a day, but we see that you recognize the need and you're working hard on that. Thank you so much. We look forward to the future. And we brought some learners here today to see the work that you do. And they're so excited and appreciative of what you're doing for them and their futures. Mariposa Academy serves 100% free and reduced lunch learners, 90% Hispanic and 50% approximate English language learners. And we are rocking it for our kids, and we're super proud. And one of our students would love to share with you today. And again, we thank you.
Good morning, legislators. My name is Alexa Lopez. I am in 4th grade. I go to Mariposa Academy in Reno. I have been going to Mariposa since I was 3 years old. Today, I'm representing Mariposa. Mariposa is such a great school because I get a lot of opportunities like this one. Mariposa has such great staff. They teach me things I didn't even know. That is why I'm here standing and talking to you. I feel like a family at Mariposa. I always feel loved. Mariposa also has great fun, like the block party, field trips, field day, and more. We also have unique uniforms. My favorite subject is math and social studies. In social studies, I am learning about Nevada. Thanks to my school, any kid can come and enjoy. That is why I love Mariposa. Thank you for all you do and provide for students across Nevada. Gracias por todo que hacen y lo que hacen para los estudiantes de Nevada.
And she wrote that all by herself.
Thank you very much for being here today. Any additional comments here in Carson City? Seeing none, I'll go to Las Vegas. Seeing none, I'll go to BPS.
Chair, we have no callers in the queue at this time.
Thank you very much. All right, with that, we will go ahead and close our meeting. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Ways Committee members, we will have a behind the bar before floor session.
And Senate Finance, please join us in room 2145. 35, sorry, wrong room. Thank you very much, and all of you have a nice day.